One, two. Good morning, everyone. This is Antero Graham and Sherby Thomas.
Good morning.
We're going to do an article review on mixed method sampling, a topology with examples from Charles Tedley and Finn Yu. Again, one of the things as Sherby and I were going through this article, it was challenging, I would say, for us to kind of go through it. Again, to see the complex different types of sampling methods that are being used. And so we're going to try to have a round table kind of a conversation, and hopefully this will be coffee and chat. I got my green tea, and we'll try to sample through this as we can. And then if you guys have any questions for us, please respond to us in the Dropbox.
Yep. Okay. So, Antero, as I was going through this article, just starting at the beginning, why was this article written in the first place? Well, the purpose that I gathered, there wasn't necessarily a problem or a design, as you could say, per se,
Right.
with this article. It seemed more that they were trying to just discuss mixed method sampling and how it's used in the social and behavior sciences. That's mainly the types of research that they researched, and just talked about how mixed method sampling was used in different types of research.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, again, when you start looking at qualitative and quantitative techniques, it is important from this article to try to see how you're going to sample your data. The whole idea is to pick a subset of what you're working on and then extrapolate what would occur if you were able to do a mass rollout of your particular research. So, again, I think that's very cool.
And then even as we were reading in the textbook last week, all about the different types of sampling, from purposive to probability sampling, all of those. Here with this type of sampling, it's a mixture of all of that. We already know about mixed research where you combine qualitative data and quantitative data, and what I gather too with the mixed method sampling, that's a way to combine the qualitative data and quantitative data.
Agreed. I'm going to go to the next slide,
Okay.
where we talked about the background of mixed methods. There were 4 categories of sampling procedures. It was probability sampling, propulsive sampling, as you mentioned, convenience, and mixed methods. And as we decided doing this presentation to you guys today, we decided to kind of break it up. We thought it would be helpful to truly look at this as, let's tell you about the definitions, and then see if there's any questions that we had, because we had several, again, trying to determine through this, and maybe that we can share our conversations with you guys as we discussed. So the first one, Sherby, is the probability sampling, and it basically is techniques are primarily used in quantitatively oriented studies involved in selecting a relatively large number of units from a population or from a specific subgroup. And probability sampling aim to achieve representativeness. Did I say that right? Representativeness. Woo!
There you go.
To some degree to get as accurate as we possibly can in a population. And so again, I looked at all of this as we looked at the various sampling methods, is using probability statistics to say, okay, if I have into the 30 and I have 1,000 folks, again, I can take those 30 folks, handle my survey, and be able to have a probability rating based on that. So that was an interesting one I probably will use if I continue on with my my desires to get my PhD.
Well, exactly, and with the authors, even in the articles, I know you said we decided to break it up. Well, they had to break it down too,
right?
Because to talk about the background of you can't talk about mixed methods if you don't talk about each component that involves mixed methods. When with probability sampling being one of them, the representativeness part is the part that that broke it down for me, would help me understand it. So pretty much, if you have a like you said, if you have a population of 1,000 people, if 70% is male, 30% is female, then your sample needs to be 70% male and 30% male to be representative of the population you're working with.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because it's much easier to work with smaller numbers than 1,000 people.
And again, when you start looking at some of the research out there, where they actually go and 1,000 people is their sample size, because they are looking at, maybe a study of growth in a community where that community may be 50,000 to 100,000 people. 1,000 people is a good sample size. Yeah. So if we go on to the next slide, propulsive sampling was what? Studies that may be defined as selecting units, individuals, groups of individuals based on a specific purpose associated with answering a research study question.
For me, I liked this one, and as far as it being a component of mixed methods, just propulsive sampling itself, for my research proposal that I'm working on, this is what I was proposing to use as my sampling technique, because specifically with my question, I made it very specific to a specific group of people and a specific type of person within that group.
Okay.
And so I feel like with propulsive sampling, the name is very self-explanatory. You choose the sample for a specific purpose.
Awesome. All right, go to the next one. Convenience sampling. Convenience sampling involves drawing samples that are both easily accessible and willing to participate in the study. So again, and the two types of convenience sampling are captive samples and volunteer samples. Again, nice thing about this is, like it says, you got a group of folks that you can gather. Like, for example, in my building, I'll be able to gather the kids that are in those respective aerospace engineering courses. So again, I think this is a way that we can, it's something I may also consider as I continue my research.
Mm-hmm. Now, the authors did say, just in reading the article, that although this can be a component of mixed method sampling, they didn't really discuss this particular type of sampling in their article. They didn't really give a reason why they didn't discuss it. They just said, quote, "We do not discuss convenience samples in any detail in this article," which focuses on how probability and propulsive samples can be used to generate mixed method samples. Well, I guess they did tell why they didn't, because they're focusing more on probability and propulsive samples in mixed method sampling.
Okay, and we move on. The next slide talks about mixed method sampling. Sampling strategies involve the selection of units or cases for a research study using both probability sampling to increase external validity and propulsive sampling to increase transferability. The mixed methods has been discussed infrequently in the research literature, although numerous examples of it exist throughout behavior and social sciences. And as I was, starting my research, a lot of this stuff came from the behavioral and social sciences as they were trying to, identify and research people. And so as we look at our particular questions, again, mixed method looks at both quantitative and qualitative, which is number and information, and is bringing them together into a research document.
Exactly. And then I guess that's why they had to discuss the probability and propulsive, because probability sampling is the numbers,
right?
Quantitative data, and the propulsive is more of the qualitative data, the questions and that part. Sorry.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, so as you look at it, I mean, as we both look at our what we're looking at researching is, do we feel comfortable looking at the numbers, and or do we want to formulate, that survey in which they check some boxes, and then our mission then will be able to then, okay, let's decipher what we have. So we're going to decipher it mathematically using probability, or we're going to decide looking at it based on the information given in the surveys. So,
or we mix it and do a little both.
Do both.
There you get mixed method sampling.
There you go. Absolutely. All right. The article format, as you guys have looked at the article in preparation for our presentation today, it was 4 major sections. It described a description of the probability sampling, a discussion of propulsive sampling. It gave general considerations to mixed methods, and then the guidelines for developing mixed method sampling. So again, we're going back into it, and again, the survey to me got to be a point of redundancy of definitions. It seems to me like they really wanted to give a strong foundation on each of the samples, so that we can be, articulate on, as we get, as we look into the future and we have to defend our research, we can be able to, hey, we're confident that our sampling was accurate.
Yes.
Okay.
They gave us lots of background information, and it was deep and in depth.
Yeah, I had to get a couple, and I don't drink coffee. I had to get a couple cups of coffee to make that work.
Well, I do drink coffee, and I'm on my third cup.
So when we looked at the 4 types again, it was random sampling, stratified sampling, and then cluster sampling. Let me go back and kind of describe what some of these are. The random sampling again occurs when each sampling unit is a clearly defined population. And like I said, in my case, if I use this, I'm looking at 6th through 8th grade middle school students that are in an aerospace engineering program, comparing them to a group of 6th and 7th, 8th grade who are not part of that population, and looking at their math and science scores over a period of time. And then stratified sampling occurs when the researcher divides the population into subgroups or stratas, such as that each unit belongs to a simple stratum or low income or middle income. In my case, all my kids, majority of my students, 86% of them are on free and reduced lunch. So again, that's a strata. Cluster sampling occurs when the sampling unit is not an individual, but a group cluster that occurs naturally in the population, such as a neighborhood, a hospital, school, or classroom. And so, again, as I was reading this, I started connecting it back to my research, and I know you did the same thing from our earlier discussion, and trying to make sure we are sampling the right subset of kids to get us the best, I guess, answer to our question.
Yes, exactly. And just going back a little bit, just talking about our background information here with the types of sampling, and just what the authors stated here. I mean, the most basic type of sampling technique would be the random sample. And if you think about it, they even stated here, that's drawing numbers out of a box, using a computer program to generate a sample with random numbers. So each person in that sample or in the sample pool has the possibility of being chosen. So it almost makes me think of a lottery.
Yeah. Very good.
And even with the stratified sample with the different groups, or doing a random sample within a specific group of people, it still gives that lottery feel, although you are only looking at a certain cluster of people there.
All right, let me move on to the next slide. We're at slide 11 for those of you that are keeping up with us. Is number 4, multiple probability techniques. Involves the use of, and just for those who are watching, we both have little kids running around, and as you'll notice, we're giving them hand signals to defer them to other parts of the house. So we apologize if you hear some background noise. That's just what we have. The probability technique involves the use of multiple quantitative techniques in the same study. The 3 previously mentioned probability samples techniques may be used in a conjunction with the other ones. And multiple cluster sampling is a technique that involves a first stage of sampling, a second stage of sampling, which units of interest are sampled within the cluster. So again, this article kept going over and over with regard to all the different sample techniques. And again, it was a challenge getting through it, but again, I saw the reasoning for it to determine, again, how we're going to do our research.
Exactly. And I know you said they kept going over and over the types of sampling. Once again, they were specifically looking at probability and propulsive sampling. All of that was just the probability side. So all of that was just the quantitative side there. So now if we go to the next slide, we begin to talk about the propulsive sampling techniques. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Propulsive. I like that better. All of those types of samples now. So now we're looking at the quantitative side. I'm sorry, I'm going to move my camera a little bit here. So there's 4 types of those. Propulsive sampling, that's sampling to achieve representativeness or comparability. So these techniques, they're used when a researcher wants to select a propulsive sample that represents a broader group of cases as closely as possible and to set up comparisons among different types of cases. So that's the main component of propulsive sampling that I saw the authors were trying to convey. Propulsive is more about comparing types of cases, making comparisons, or conclusions based on those comparisons. And they specifically noted 6 types of sampling procedures that are based on achieving the representativeness or the comparability.
Right.
Typical case sampling, extreme or deviant case sampling, intensity sampling, maximum variation sampling, homogeneous sampling, and reputational sampling. All those, some of these propulsive sampling techniques are aimed at generating representative cases. Most are aimed at producing contrasting cases. So what they're trying to do is if I look at this group of people, what is this question I'm trying to find out look like with this group? Okay, so if I go over here and look at this group of people, what does it look like with this group, and then compare the results.
Very good. Absolutely. Go to the next page. You got sample special. So sampling special or unique cases. Tell me, I couldn't get that one. What do you think of that?
With this one, what I gathered they were trying to convey was, if you think of a specific question that they have, and if you think of it on a continuum, then let's try to find one that doesn't meet any of the criteria that we found with these other cases. So a special case or a unique case. And so I'm going to break the rules of showing a PowerPoint, and I'm going to read directly from the slide. I'm sorry, I'm being boring right now. Sampling special or unique cases are employed when the individual case itself or a specific group of cases is a major focus of the investigation rather than an issue. Often the focus of qualitative research, especially in the areas of anthropology and sociology. So here's this specific group. It doesn't match anything else we've seen, so let's study it and figure it out.
Gotcha.
And so the next one, if you don't mind, I'll go on with the next one, since I'm rolling and reading from the slide. Sequential sampling. So even if I break that down and I just use my semantic skills, there's sequence sampling in order.
Right.
So it uses the gradual selection principle of sampling when the goal of the research project is the generation of theory or broadly defined themes, or the sample evolves of its own accord as data are being collected. Gradual selection may be defined as the sequential selection of units or cases based on their relevance to the research questions, not their representativeness. And so, yeah, I read that. What? Okay. But what I feel the authors were trying to convey there with sequential sampling, the data grows as they do more research. So, and I base that off of the sample evolves of its own accord as data are being collected.
Gotcha. We'll go to that next slide.
Sure. I got a low battery there, sorry.
So there are 4 types of propulsive sampling techniques that are involved with sequential sampling. You have theoretical, confirming and disconfirming, opportunistic, also known as emergent sampling, snowball sampling, also known as chain sampling. All of these sampling techniques involve the principle of gradual selection. And it's, again, as you said, is like as things come up, you grab them versus identifying them up front. And then number 4 was sampling using multiple propulsive techniques, which involves the use of multiple qual techniques in the same study.
Yes. Now that snowball sampling, I do recall that one from the reading. And I do remember that's where if I chose somebody for my sample, then they tell somebody about it, and that's how I get my sample. They by word of mouth, kind of.
All right. General considerations concerning mixed method sampling. Again, I think we attempted to put it into a chart format to kind of help folks describe what's going on.
Yes, and pretty much we generated this based off of the author's chart that was in there. They tried to combine all of their information there to show you the differences between propulsive sampling and probability sampling. Well, to compare and contrast propulsive sampling and probability sampling. So I know we won't read the whole chart here to you, but as you can see, under the propulsive sampling side, as far as the purpose of propulsive and probability sampling, they both want to address research questions. But the rationale for selecting specific cases in propulsive sampling is to address specific purposes related to research questions, whereas with probability, you want representativeness. The sample size, even with propulsive sampling, is small, 30 or less, whereas probability, you need to have large enough. It needs to be as big as it needs to be in order to have representative for the population that you're researching. But you need at least 50. And then when the sample is selected, the timing of that for propulsive is before the study, during, or both. With probability, has to be before the study begins.
Okay. Let me go on to the next slide. Slide 16, the types of mixed method sampling strategies. The authors identified 5 types of mixed method sampling strategies based on their review of the studies and behavioral sciences. Those 5 are basic mixed methods, sequential, again, concurrent, multi-level, and sampling using multiple mixed method sampling strategies.
Yeah, so here we get to the part of the article where they finally, technical difficulties, where they finally began to talk about mixed methods. So they gave us all of this background information, everything that goes into making a mixed methods sample, but now we actually talk about the different strategies with mixed methods that you can use, and those were also deep and in depth.
So you had 4, it looks like, initially. We're going to, the sampling strategy should be, and I'm going to get on here and read it as well. The sampling strategy should stem logically from the research question and hypotheses that are being addressed by the study. Researchers should be sure to follow the assumptions of the probability and the propulsive sampling techniques that are used. The sampling strategy should generate thorough qual and quan databases on the research question under study. And the sampling strategy should allow the researcher to draw clear inferences from both the qual and quantitative. So again, you're right. When you look through this article and you come down and they give you all this background, all this detailed stuff, and then say, you could have cut to the chase. You could have said, let me go to the back of this article, and it says, here's when you use mixed methods, when you want to do these kind of things.
And then here are the rules for using mixed methods sampling. Right. Yes. And then there's more.
Yeah, let's go to 18. Then, the sampling strategy must be ethical. The sampling strategy should be feasible and efficient. The sampling strategy should allow the researchers and team to transfer or generalize the conclusion. Again, as we have learned already through our readings, is that you want to take somebody else's studies who they say, hey, I had a gap, and try to extrapolate to something that you can actually research on. And they're saying using that here as well. And then number 8, the researchers should describe their sampling strategy in enough detail so that other investigators can understand what they actually did, and perhaps use those strategies in future studies.
Along with what we learned about with reliability, right?
Yep.
Okay, so the authors did talk about, well, actually, I kind of summarized here some difficulties they had with their research, because pretty much they were just trying to research how was mixed methods sampling used in other research studies. So some of the things that they found or obstacles they ran into as they were trying to do their research.
Right.
Identifying an appropriate vocabulary to use with mixed method sampling. And the question they posed was, should mixed method sampling use a combination of the vocabulary used for propulsive and probability sampling, or should it have its own separate vocabulary? So I guess when you're talking about representativeness versus probability and the numbers that go along with that, because mixed method sampling is the combination of both of those types of sampling techniques, it is almost something separate within itself. Although it has components of both, it still is a separate entity.
Right.
So they talked about the vocabulary aspect of that, and then they also said that they found minimal previous research in the area of how researchers combine propulsive and probability sampling in some of the forms of mixed method sampling. So based on the types of the list of examples of mixed method sampling techniques that we gave you, the concurrent, the basic mixed method sampling techniques, they had difficulty showing how the researchers actually use the data as they use those different types of mixed method samples. And then lastly, the authors were unable to use many of the mixed method sampling articles they researched in their article due to lack of details regarding sampling. So I guess that's where they generated guideline number 8 from, that if you're going to use mixed method sampling, you need to be very detailed in how you used it. You need to be just very, very detailed in exactly how you use the probability data. How did you use the qualitative data or the quantitative data, and be very specific, so that to increase reliability also, and so that other people can research you and know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. As we come to our conclusion, again, the last slide is creativity and flexibility is the practical design of mixed method sampling schemes, and are crucial to the success of the research study. The success of a mixed method research project answering a variety of questions is a function, to a large degree, of the combination of sampling strategies that are employed. In conclusion, it's important to remember that in research, sampling is destiny. That was cool. That was cool. Well, this is Antero Graham and Sherby.
This is Sherby Thomas.
We appreciate you guys, and hopefully you got something out of our presentation today.
Thank you so much.